The soft murmur of voices in the conference room faded as I stepped into the hallway, phone buzzing insistently in my hand. The screen flashed Ethan's name, my husband of 6 years. I took a steadying breath, expecting the usual small talk. "How's your trip?" or "When will you be home?" But the moment I answered, my world shattered. "I'm divorcing you," Ethan's voice cut through, cold and triumphant, dripping with arrogance I'd never heard so clearly before. "And I've already sold the apartment," he added, letting out a short, cruel laugh that made my blood run cold. "So you better figure out where you're going to live." For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. My hand clenched so tightly around the phone that I felt the edges pressing into my palm. The conference room behind me suddenly felt a world away, like a distant planet where normal people talked about marketing strategies and quarterly goals. Here, in this sterile hallway, my life was crumbling in real time. "You sold the apartment?" I forced my voice to stay calm, even as rage and disbelief twisted inside me. "Yeah," he replied, his tone light, almost amused. "Claire and I need the money to start our life together. She deserves better than that tiny place anyway. Claire." Hearing her name stabbed deeper than I expected, even though I'd sensed for months that someone else was lurking in the shadows of Ethan's late nights and sudden work trips. But knowing and hearing were two different things. Hearing her name spoken with such casual entitlement ignited a fire in my chest. "Sounds good," I said evenly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of hearing me break. But inside, I was a storm. My mind was already racing, not just with heartbreak, but with cold, furious calculation. Because what Ethan didn't know, what he'd never cared enough to pay attention to, was that when we refinanced the apartment earlier this year, the deed had been transferred to my name alone. He'd signed the paperwork without reading it, too eager to lock in the lower interest rate I'd negotiated. Ethan thought he'd won, that he could yank the ground from under my feet, laugh in my face, and ride off into the sunset with Claire and my money. But he'd just stepped into his own trap, blind to the consequences his arrogance had set in motion. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the hallway around me came back into focus. The muted hum of colleagues chatting, the distant ding of an elevator. Normal life moved on, unaware that mine had just split apart. But instead of feeling defeated, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. Ethan might think he could destroy me with a single phone call, but I wasn't going down without a fight. If he wanted a war, I was ready to win it. I walked back into the conference room with my head held high, every nerve in my body alive with determination. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a battle that would reveal just how wrong Ethan had been about me, and just how thoroughly I would take back everything he tried to steal. I spent the rest of that afternoon moving through meetings in a daze, each nod and polite smile hiding the storm raging in my mind. Ethan thought he'd cornered me, but he didn't realize I'd been quietly preparing for this moment without even knowing it. The apartment he believed he'd sold out from under me had been mine alone for months. He'd signed the transfer paperwork during the refinancing like it was just another annoying form, too confident to question why his name was missing from the deed. Every memory of him brushing aside my concerns about money came flooding back. The times I'd asked about our savings, and he'd changed the subject with a kiss. The nights he'd come home late, reeking of expensive whiskey, telling me he'd been networking for us. The way he'd smiled when I'd worried about our mortgage, like he knew something I didn't. That smug grin had always made me uneasy, but I'd told myself to trust him. Now I saw the truth. He'd counted on my trust, on me being too naive or too in love to notice what he was doing. But I had noticed. And while he spent his nights whispering promises to Claire, I'd made sure my future didn't rest in his hands. When I finally returned to my hotel room, the shock had burned away, leaving a sharp, focused determination in its place. I called Chloe the moment I shut the door behind me. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm but alert. "Is everything okay?" she asked, but she must have heard the steel in my tone. "No," I said, sinking into the edge of the bed. "Ethan called me. He says he's divorcing me, and he claims he's already sold the apartment." There was a beat of stunned silence before Chloe let out a low whistle. "He sold what now?" I explained everything, laying out every detail, the call, the smugness in his voice, the name Claire, the apartment. By the time I finished, my voice was calm, almost eerily so. It felt like I was talking about someone else's disaster. "Let me get this straight," Chloe said, her voice crisp now, the lawyer in her fully awake. "He thinks he sold the apartment, But the deed has been in your name alone since the refinance. Yes, I confirmed, the tiniest spark of satisfaction flickering in my chest. I have the paperwork. He signed everything without a second glance. Chloe laughed, a short, incredulous sound. Then he can't sell it. Any deal he's made is invalid. And if he's taken money from a buyer, he's on the hook for fraud. The word hung in the air, sending a thrill through me. Fraud. Not only had Ethan failed to sell my home, but he'd set himself up for criminal charges. He thought he'd left me with nothing, but in reality, he'd left himself exposed. What do we do next? I asked, gripping the phone tighter. First, I'll notify any potential buyer that the sale is invalid, Chloe said, already switching into her efficient, battle-ready mode. Then I'll draft a letter for Ethan explaining the consequences. If he's smart, he'll back off quietly. If not, we'll take him to court. For the first time that day, I felt like I could breathe. I thanked Chloe, my voice steady, then stood and looked out the window at the city lights. Ethan thought he'd crushed me with one phone call, but he didn't know the woman he was dealing with. This wasn't over. I was going to fight, and I was going to win. The hours after my call with Chloe felt like a strange calm before the storm. I ordered room service I barely touched, and spent the evening reviewing every email, bank statement, and document I could find. If Ethan thought I'd crumble, he'd underestimated me more than I ever imagined. I wasn't going to let him waltz into a new life with Claire, funded by the home I'd worked so hard to build. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smug smile during that call, heard his condescending laugh as he told me to figure out where you're going to live. But with each replay, my fear hardened into something stronger, resolve. Ethan wanted a fight. I was going to give him one he'd never forget. The next morning, I woke early, my mind already racing through my plan. I called Chloe again as soon as her office opened. I'm back today, I told her, my voice calm but urgent. What's our first step? We've already notified the buyer, Chloe said, her tone brisk and precise. They were shocked and furious. They're willing to cooperate fully, which will make this much easier. A rush of relief and grim satisfaction washed over me. Ethan's house of cards was already starting to collapse. And Ethan? I asked. I sent him the formal letter this morning, she replied. It details the illegality of the sale, your sole ownership, and the potential for fraud charges if he doesn't return any money taken. I exhaled slowly. Chloe's thoroughness gave me a strange peace. She wasn't just protecting my apartment. She was giving me the chance to reclaim my life. The flight home felt different from any other. Each mile I traveled back toward the city felt like a mile closer to my own power. I spent the time thinking not about what I'd lost, but what I was about to take back. Ethan thought I was powerless. He had no idea how wrong he was. When I landed, I called Chloe from the baggage claim. I'm home, I told her. What's next? Be ready, she said. I expect he'll come looking for you once he realizes he can't just sweep this under the rug. Don't let him intimidate you. I promised her I wouldn't. Later that day, I stepped into the apartment, my apartment. The silence was deafening, the air thick with the remnants of Ethan's presence, his jacket still hanging on the back of a chair, his cologne faint in the bedroom. But instead of letting it overwhelm me, I let it fuel me. This space, which once felt like our shared dream, was mine alone now. That evening, just as Chloe predicted, Ethan stormed in, his eyes wild and his phone clutched in his hand. What the hell is this? He shouted, waving the letter Chloe had sent. You're saying I can't sell the apartment? It's half mine. I crossed my arms, meeting his rage with unwavering calm. No, Ethan. The deed has been in my name for months. You signed off on it yourself. He froze, his expression shifting from fury to confusion, and then to a simmering panic. You think you're so clever, don't you? He spat. This doesn't change anything. I made a deal, and you're going to look like a fool when it all falls apart. I stepped closer, my voice low and cold. The sale is already void. The buyer knows it, and they're ready to sue you for fraud if you don't return their deposit. His face drained of color. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. This was just the beginning. Ethan had declared war on me with that call. Now it was my turn to show him exactly who he'd underestimated. For a moment, the room was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the wall clock above the kitchen counter. Ethan's eyes darted to the paperwork I held out, the official deed showing my name alone. His lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. The realization was finally sinking in. He'd lost control. You signed the transfer papers yourself, I reminded him, my tone cool and unwavering. Or did you skim over the details like you always do? His face darkened, and he stepped forward, trying to loom over me the way he always had when he wanted to intimidate me. But this time, I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, eyes locked on his. This apartment is legally mine, I said evenly. You can't sell it. You can't kick me out. You have nothing. The words seemed to strip away the last of his bluster. He turned and started pacing the living room, his agitation boiling over. This is ridiculous, he snapped, voice rising. You're blowing this out of proportion. You can't just throw me out of here. We built this life together. Actually, I corrected, taking a measured step forward. I built it. You took it for granted. And now, you're the one who's out. He stopped pacing, breathing heavily, eyes wide with disbelief. You're serious, he said, voice trembling between rage and desperation. I nodded once. I'm done living under your thumb, Ethan. I'm done pretending we're a team when you've been working behind my back this entire time. As if on cue, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. His eyes flicked to it, but he didn't pick it up. I glanced at the screen, Claire's name flashing in bright letters. The sight hardened my resolve even more. Oh, and if you think Claire is going to wait around while you try to untangle this mess, I added with quiet intensity, you're in for another unpleasant surprise. His jaw clenched. What do you mean? I mean, I continued, voice low, that the buyer knows the sale was fraudulent. If you've already spent the deposit, you could face criminal charges. And your precious Claire might not stick around for that. He blanched, finally understanding how deep a hole he'd dug himself into. You wouldn't press charges, would you? He asked, voice suddenly small. I narrowed my eyes. That depends on whether you make this easy or hard. Return every cent of that deposit, leave my apartment, sign the divorce papers, and don't try to intimidate me again. He staggered backward a step as if struck, his eyes wet with the start of tears he was too proud to shed. His phone buzzed again, the room filled with the tinny vibration that seemed to mock him. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. For so long, he'd been the one with the power. But standing there, with him flailing for excuses and threats, I finally felt what it was like to reclaim my own strength. I'll give you until the end of today, I said firmly. Take your things, figure out where you're going to go, but know this. If you try anything, my lawyer is ready, and next time, I won't hesitate to let the courts decide. His shoulders slumped, his bravado completely drained. For a flicker of a second, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered his laughter on that call, how he'd reveled in my supposed downfall. And I knew I was making the right choice. This was my home, and no one, not Ethan, not anyone, would ever take it away from me again. The hours that followed felt like the longest of my life. After Ethan's shoulders slumped in defeat, he disappeared into the bedroom, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled on the wall. The silence that settled afterward was heavy, but not unwelcome. It was the quiet before the final unraveling. I busied myself by gathering important documents, double-checking every file Chloe had sent me. I wanted to be ready for whatever Ethan might try next. I barely noticed the sun dipping below the skyline outside the windows until the apartment was bathed in twilight. Just after 8, Ethan emerged, his eyes bloodshot, hair disheveled, and clothes wrinkled. He looked like a man who'd aged a decade in a single afternoon. He stopped a few feet away from me, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a boy caught in a lie. Olivia, he began, voice raspy and low. It was the first time he'd used my name all day. I know I messed up. But can't we talk about this? We've been together for 6 years. Doesn't that mean anything? His sudden softness almost made me laugh. Moments ago, he'd been screaming, trying to bully me into submission. Now he looked like he might cry. But I'd spent too many nights alone, too many mornings questioning my own worth because of his indifference. I wasn't falling for it again. It meant something, I said honestly, my voice steady. But you threw it away the moment you decided I was just an obstacle to your new life. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. His gaze dropped to the floor. Please, he tried, voice cracking. I'll give the money back. I'll tell Claire it's over. I'll do anything. I almost pitied him, but then I thought of the way he'd laughed on the phone, so sure I'd be powerless and homeless. That memory hardened me. This isn't about Claire or the money anymore, I replied firmly. It's about respect. And you lost mine a long time ago. He looked up, desperation shining in his eyes. I can change, he whispered. No, I said quietly but with finality. You had your chance. I gave you years of my life. Now, I'm giving those years back to myself. He inhaled sharply, as if my words had slapped him. I stood my ground, watching as he staggered into the bedroom to finish packing. The apartment echoed with the sounds of drawers opening, boxes closing, and the dull thud of his things hitting the floor. When he finally emerged with 2 suitcases, I held the door open. Our eyes met one last time, his pleading, mine unwavering. Goodbye, Ethan, I said. Don't come back. He hesitated, lips parted, but I turned away, ending the conversation. He shuffled out, the door clicking shut behind him like the final note of a song I'd heard too many times. I locked the door and leaned against it, letting the silence seep into my bones. For the first time in what felt like forever, the apartment was mine, truly mine. It wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a symbol of everything I'd survived and everything I was determined to become. As the night deepened, I began to clean. I boxed up the last of Ethan's forgotten things, moved the furniture to better suit my own tastes, and lit a candle whose gentle scent erased the last traces of his cologne. This wasn't just about reclaiming an apartment. It was about reclaiming myself. And in that quiet, newly empty space, I felt the stirrings of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The first morning after Ethan left, I woke up to a startling quiet. There was no sound of him shuffling through the kitchen or slamming drawers because he couldn't find his keys. The apartment felt cavernous, every room a reminder of his absence. But instead of feeling empty, it felt full of possibility. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the worn wood. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to rush to please someone else or brace myself for a passive-aggressive comment. I could simply sit, sip my drink, and breathe. The apartment looked different already. I'd spent the night before moving furniture, boxing up Ethan's trophies and sports memorabilia, and replacing them with things I loved: framed prints of my favorite artists, a stack of novels I'd been meaning to read, a plush blanket I'd bought but always kept stored away because he thought it was too girly. Each small change felt like a declaration. This is my home now. Lauren, my best friend since college, showed up around noon, arms full of takeout and a bottle of champagne. I hope you're hungry, she said with a grin as I opened the door. I could eat a horse, I admitted, the tension I'd been carrying melting away at the sight of her. She walked in, scanning the apartment with an approving nod. Wow, it already feels brighter in here, she said, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. It's like you exorcised the ghost of Ethan. I laughed, a real, honest laugh that felt strange and wonderful in my own mouth. That's exactly what I've been trying to do. Over greasy fries and sweet cold champagne, I told her everything: Ethan's betrayal, the attempted sale, the confrontation, and the quiet after he'd left. Lauren listened without interrupting, eyes flashing with anger, then softening with sympathy. I'm so proud of you, Liv, she said when I finished, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. He tried to break you, but you're stronger than ever. Her words hit deeper than I expected. For so long, I doubted myself, let Ethan's subtle digs wear me down. But here I was, sitting in the apartment I'd saved, surrounded by things that made me happy, with a friend who reminded me I wasn't alone. That afternoon, we tackled the apartment together. We scrubbed surfaces until they gleamed, rearranged furniture to open up the space, and even splurged on fresh flowers for the dining table. By evening, the apartment looked and felt transformed, like a place where I could truly start over. As Lauren was leaving, she turned at the door, her eyes shining. You know what this calls for? She said, raising an eyebrow. A girls' night? You, me, and the rooftop bar you've always wanted to try, but never did, because he hated crowds. I smiled, feeling excitement stir in my chest. I'd love that. When the door clicked shut behind her, I sank into my new reading nook, curling up with a novel and letting the silence of the apartment envelop me. But it wasn't the tense, heavy silence of the past. It was peaceful, full of promise. For the first time in years, I felt like I could plan a future that was entirely my own. A life where I chose what made me happy, without compromise or apology. And as I turned the page, I realized that what had felt like an ending was really the start of something far more beautiful. A month later, the apartment looked nothing like the space Ethan once dominated. Light streamed in through spotless windows, reflecting off the bright, cozy decor I'd chosen. A soft rug now covered the living room floor. My favorite candles lined the shelves, and a collection of cheerful plants added life to every corner. It wasn't just a place to live, it was my sanctuary, a testament to everything I'd overcome. The divorce had finalized with surprisingly little resistance. Chloe handled every detail with precision, and Ethan, perhaps exhausted by the fight he'd lost before it began, signed the papers without so much as a last-ditch plea. There were no dramatic scenes, no more desperate phone calls, just a clean, quiet end. I'd half expected to feel grief when the decree arrived, but instead, I felt free, truly, deeply free. One evening, Lauren and I sat on the balcony, a soft breeze carrying the scent of the city. We toasted with chilled glasses of wine as the skyline glittered around us. "To fresh starts," she said, clinking her glass against mine. "To never doubting my worth again," I replied. Feeling the words anchor deep in my soul, we talked long into the night about dreams I'd put on hold for too long. Traveling to Italy, starting the art class I'd always wanted, even launching the small online shop I'd once planned but abandoned because Ethan had called it silly. Each idea felt exciting now, not like a burden or a risk. For the first time, the future felt like something I got to create for myself. As I lay in bed that night, I realized that Ethan's betrayal, painful and humiliating as it had been, had also been my greatest turning point. It forced me to confront how little I'd been living for myself, how easily I'd let someone else's needs and moods dictate my everyday. It taught me that love without respect isn't love at all, and that no relationship is worth sacrificing your own dignity or happiness. If you've ever felt trapped in a situation where you were made to feel small, unworthy, or afraid to stand up for yourself, I hope my story reminds you that it's never too late to take back your power. You don't need anyone's permission to choose yourself. The moment you do, the world begins to open up in ways you never imagined. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If Olivia's story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever found the courage to reclaim your life? What helped you take that first step? Please share your experience in the comments below. Your words might inspire someone who needs it right now. And if you found the story powerful or know someone who could use a reminder of their strength, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We share true stories of resilience, love, and self-discovery every week to remind you that you're never alone and that you deserve a life that makes you feel alive. Remember, your life is yours to live. Choose yourself, choose happiness, and never let anyone convince you that you deserve less than that.